Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash subscribe, hit the like, all of that good stuff. To me, boxing promoters really are failing right now. Obviously, in the past few months, the world's been turned upside down by this global pandemic. Sports were shut down for a while, and everything was turned on its head. Now, as the different sports slowly started to come back, I think we can see how far boxing is behind other sports. You know, the obvious example is MMA. Look at how the UFC have been bouncing back during this pandemic. They've been putting on top fights for multiple weeks during this pandemic. Top 5, top 6 contenders fighting each other. World title fights. Mega fights like Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal, which is coming up. The UFC have been killing it, and they've been doing some really good numbers from what I hear. And to me, the UFC have really took a bad situation and essentially used it to build their brand. You know, they was operating during a time where there was no live sport. There was nothing to watch. As a result, it's obvious people are going to watch that product who wouldn't usually watch it. And the product they've been putting on has been very good. So without question, MMA would have gained more fans during this pandemic than it's lost. That's without question. And I'm one of those people, by the way. I've always been like a super casual MMA fan, but I never really gave it a serious chance. But during the pandemic, because there was nothing else to watch, I gave it a real chance. And quite frankly, I've been enjoying it, and I will follow the sport much more closely from now on. What I'm saying is, the UFC have really taken this negative event and turned it into a positive, you know, and that goes to show what sort of minds are running the UFC. Whereas when you compare it to boxing, you know, these guys are all shysters, they're greedy, a lot of these guys are dinosaurs, and they're serving up absolute crap. I mean, look at the fights we've got so far post-lockdown or even during the lockdown. Absolute rubbish. Mismatches of highest proportion, etc, etc. The best fight we have is Dillian Whyte versus Alexander Povetkin. Well, that's the most notable fight we have, and that's behind a paywall in the UK. To me, this whole pandemic has really highlighted how flawed boxing is in terms of how it's run, and also the fact that boxing fans are so accepting of absolute rubbish. When we had no boxing, I was actually saying, I'll watch anything right now. You know, any sort of fight will do. But once you've watched a couple of mismatches, it gets rather old, right? You know, we've had nothing, absolutely nothing. You know, if there was a bright mind in boxing, a guy who was really a trendsetter, a guy who was really eager not only to make money, and obviously make his fighters money, but also keen to grow the sport, if we had that sort of mind in boxing, you know, he would be taking this opportunity to actually attract new fans, make the most of a terrible situation, actually put good fights on during the lockdown when nothing else is on. You know, Top Rank in particular had a great opportunity to really pull in some new fans, you know, by making some decent fights. Never happens. Never happens. Because their viewing figures have been absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. Maybe if the fights were of better quality, obviously the figures would have been a lot better, and potentially we would have attracted some new fans into the sport. But the people running boxing, you know, the promoters, the sanctioning bodies, they are so short-sighted. It's all about the next payday, the next pay-per-view. You know, it's all about making money in the short term, never about growing the sport or anything like that. It's never about raising the profile of a sport and attracting new fans. And obviously, by the way, in the long run, that would actually result in more money if you actually grow the sport, make it a bigger sport. But none of these promoters are willing to try and do something like that. None of these promoters were willing to put their hand in their pocket and really try to make something of this lockdown and really try to push the sport to a new audience. None of these guys were willing to do it. Top Rank, you know, they've got ESPN, the biggest sport broadcaster in America, served up absolute crap. When Eddie Hearn first went to America, all we heard about was this $1 billion deal. He's going to put everyone out of business. Where's he been during the lockdown? I think his first card back is like 15th of August or something like that. Why wasn't we given cards earlier? of good quality. I mean, DAZN, they were paying the likes of Mikey Garcia $7 million before the lockdown, spending money willy-nilly. Why can't you get a couple of $1 million together, put Estrada versus Gonzalez on during lockdown? Great fight. Would have been a great fight. People would have been very excited. You know, there's fights out there that could have been made of good quality in which you wouldn't have to spend all that much. But no, that's too easy. It's embarrassing, man. It's embarrassing. The quality of fights we've had, you know, it's been awful. It goes to show, right, when one of the best fights we've had was Marius Wack versus Kevin Johnson. Let that sink in. In the past 3-4 months, that is one of the best fights we've had. And there's no pressure on these promoters whatsoever. None at all. You know, this whole YouTube boxing community and the online boxing community at large, we should be coming together and really putting pressure on these promoters. Instead, we've got men out here talking about fucking gloves. You know, a glove conspiracy. Oh, Tyson Fury, he was wearing Freddy Krueger's gloves. He was cheating. That's what people are talking about. Not the crap product we're being served week after week now. Fucking nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. You can tell why boxing's a dying sport in the States. You really can, how it's run. There's a bubble in the UK right now. It's grown a lot in the UK, the sport. There's a lot of fans interested. But every bubble bursts. And at that point, the short-sightedness of how it's been run will be even more apparent. No effort to grow the sport. No effort to really, you know, get creative during the lockdown. And I think that has severely hurt boxing. Boxing has lost a lot of momentum in the US and even the UK. Lost a lot of momentum. And then you see the UFC doing what they're doing. I know it's a different structure. I don't want to hear people tell me that. I know it's a different structure. But we have individual promoters in boxing. They could be trying to push the envelope. Like I said, Eddie Hearn, that $1 billion deal. Why can't he pull fucking strings like Dana White and put some good fights on? I mean, like he's told us numerous times, he's got the budget, he's got the money. Where are the fights? Where's the initiative? You know? Where's the ingenuity? Not there. But this guy's the saviour of boxing? Are you serious? Come on now. Come on. Nah. Eddie Hearn isn't the saviour of boxing in the UK like people paint him out to be. Eddie Hearn, has he built something really good in Matchroom? Absolutely. But what are the foundations like? Has he built that on sand? We shall see. I think there's a bubble in the UK in terms of boxing. Eventually it's going to burst. We've seen that before already. We've seen it before already, man. You know, like the late 90s after Eubank and Ben left. Late 90s, early 2000s. It was kind of barren in the UK. You know, we had a whole host of domestic level fights on Sky Sports for the WBU title. They was pushing that as a world title back then. It was a barren time. You know, then Joe Calzaghe and Ricky Hatton came along. They had good success. They pumped some interest back in boxing. After those guys left, again, we was in another barren time. It was really only David Haye who was holding British boxing together back then. And that's something I don't think he gets enough credit for, in all honesty. I know the guy had his faults, and he made some questionable career choices, but, you know, he was very important to British boxing. And now, sort of 2012 onwards, we've been going through a massive boom. But I think the bubble could burst, not in the near future, but not in the too far distant future, if you get what I mean. I really think this pandemic will do a lot more damage to British boxing than it will American boxing, in all honesty. Another thing you have to consider, the small hall shows, the small hall promoters, the small hall fighters. Not every world-class fighter from the UK is a touted amateur. Not every world champion in recent years has been a touted amateur. A lot of these guys, like Lee Selby, Josh Warrington, these guys learned their trade in the small hall shows. You know, selling a few hundred tickets, fighting journeymen, learning their trade. That's how these guys came up. Right now, small hall boxing isn't a thing. It's not going on. These guys can't put on shows right now without a crowd. And there's a generation of fighters who don't have an amateur background, who may be talented, but they're not active because they can't fight, obviously. And we could lose a whole generation of young fighters because of this pandemic. You know, guys could call it a day, call it quits, because it's not financially viable waiting around. They may go another route. Even if they stick around, you know, this lost time could be detrimental to their development. This could have severe knock-on effects for British boxing. Mark my words. You may not see it initially. You may see a few crowds in the future where you've got 20,000 mongs singing Sweet Caroline. But that doesn't mean boxing is back. That doesn't mean boxing isn't in a precarious state. I'm very worried for the future of British boxing. I really am. But we'll have to see what happens. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I hope all of this goes well. I hope it all works itself out, and I hope we get some great fights in the near future. But I'm feeling really pessimistic about the state of boxing in general, especially in the UK. But what can we do about it, really? What can we do about it? Nobody on this online boxing shit is on the same page, you know? For a lot of people, you know, boxing is secondary. They have other agendas to push. In reality, despite our differences, like I always say, the number one goal should always be the same for fight fans, and that is to see the best fights. That should be our main requirement as fight fans, regardless of who you support, where you come from, where you live, etc, etc. That should be the number one goal, and we're not on the same page. We're not on the same page. We've got guys out here who, you know, they proclaim to be fans of boxing. They're basically boxing fans who run channels. But these guys have access to promoters, to managers, etc. And do any of these guys really put pressure on these personalities in boxing? You know, asking questions, hard questions, on behalf of boxing fans for paying customers? Not really, as far as I'm concerned. So what can we do about it? Well, anybody who wants good fights, I guess, make your opinion very loud and very clear. You know, share it on social media. Get your comrades to retweet it or share it, whatever you want to say, and go from there basically. But I think from now on, I'm going to be a lot more vocal in regards to this whole the state of boxing, because it's getting on my fucking nerves. I ain't got a big channel, not going to go far, but fuck it, might as well do my bit, right? I want this sport to thrive. I want good fights, man. I want good fights to entertain me. I want to see the best fight the best across all levels. Not just world level, obviously domestic level, European level, fringe world level, and obviously world level. I want to see the best fights, competitive fights. That's all we ask for. You know, that's all we ask for. And quite frankly, boxing as a whole, you know, during this lockdown and right now, it's not really offered that at all, has it? It's not offered that at all. It's been poor. It's been really poor, and it's been a lost opportunity as far as I'm concerned. A lost opportunity. But there we go. I'll always love this sport. Always will love this sport. It's always going to be my sport, you know? It's always going to be my sport. But sometimes, man, this shit gets tiresome, bro. Honestly, this shit gets tiresome, including this whole YouTube scene, you know? But yeah, man, what can I say? It is what it is. It is what it is. Like I said, hopefully boxing picks itself back up and we actually get some really good fights, man. 2019 was a pretty good year, but obviously this year was never going to be as good with what's going on, but just the lack of ingenuity, the lack of creativity, the lack of initiative from these promoters just really highlights how boxing really isn't in safe hands right now, you know? But what can we say? We're always going to be here. I will at least. But yeah, hopefully it improves, man. Share your thoughts below. I know it's a bit of a negative video, a bit of a downer video, but sometimes, man, you got to let loose and just get this shit off your chest. Yeah, man. Share your thoughts below. Tell me your thoughts on this whole topic. And do you agree, disagree, somewhere in between? Share your thoughts below. Peace.